John Lennon.
Welcome to Issues That Matter. I'm Cynthia Pooler. My guest today is Tony Granowitz,
Granovich.
and he wrote a book on John Lennon, and it's called, um,
Careless Genius,
yes,
John Lennon and His Maternal Demon.
okay, and it's basically the assassination of John Lennon, and I found the book quite interesting. So, first of all, Tony, why'd you write the book?
I just had to, because I was living in a building. I was living in an apartment with my family for a long time. And all of a sudden, the landlords changed. And the landlord that came in was only there for 2 years, 2 years, and he moved out the night John Lennon was assassinated. And that's where the mystery began. And there was a lot of torment because they tried to get us out of the building before the assassination. And there was another owner who turned out to be the foreign minister of Morocco, actually his wife. And there was just constant torment. And I would say that this is meant to set the record straight. I'm glad I stayed. We stayed and hung out. My parents did. This is like 43 years ago.
Mhm.
Okay. And the pieces started to fall together as to what happened to John Lennon and who did it. It's a whodunit as well.
So, was your family living in the Dakota when John was shot?
No, my family was living in a brownstone across this park from Dakota.
Okay.
They had moved in when I was born. And all of a sudden, a new landlord comes in, and this landlord moves out and in with Yoko for the next 20, 25 years until became her constant companion. So I felt it was rather bizarre.
Okay.
And he was an important figure in acting as our spokesman. She was very talkative before the assassination, and he actually spoke for her after the assassination. So anyone would find that bizarre because John Lennon is a world historical figure.
And what was Yoko's companion's name?
Samuel Havatoy.
So, tell us a little bit about the first chapter on John and his relationship with his wife. Everybody thought that, they were happily married, that they
Well, that's the second chapter. First
okay.
chapter is about the landlord and his attorney, who have a history, especially the attorney. As I point out, the attorney was also the attorney who got Jimi Hendrix's passport to go to London in just a phone call back in 1966. And that I only pieced together in the new millennium. So that's the backstory or the first chapter in this horrible saga, which needs to be accounted for. Now, I talk about in the book, there might have been a second assassin. Well, in the Daily Mail, there's a fellow wrote an article on June 10th. It said there had to be two assassins because there were two different bullets that were fired.
Okay, when you say June 10th, what year?
This year, after my book was published.
Okay.
So it confirms my thesis and a number of other people.
Okay, so can you go into your thoughts on the relationship between John and Yoko? You portrayed them as not a very happy couple. You portrayed Yoko as being kind of intimidated by John's creativity, and she felt as if she was more creative than he was, and she was very resentful towards that, right?
Yeah, there's plenty of evidence.
Okay. Okay. So give us some examples.
Well, I use other sources. And there's also Paul McCartney's interview by Howard Stern, in which she attended the sessions, the first girlfriend or wife to attend the sessions. And she's very presumptuous. She sits on the amplifier. The very first session, she sits on an amplifier.
Uh-huh.
And there are plenty of quotes, she resented John Green's book, her tarot card reader. I read his book. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
There are other books listed. All of them point to how can these two people live together? Now we're talking about the 1970s.
Mm-hmm.
And also Yoko set her up with John Lennon's assistant, May Pang.
Mm-hmm.
And he lived with her for a couple of years. She wrote a book. And then a documentary just came out last December, I believe, in which she dramatized what she believed. I didn't see the documentary.
Mm-hmm.
But the relationship was dysfunctional, and she became his mistress, and he moved out for a couple of years.
Okay.
And he moved back when he was cured of his, I don't know what, it's different accounts, but the point is, he moved back. She was afraid of losing him, finally, because his estate, his fame, and managed to engineer Sean Lennon, the second son's birth date,
Right.
through a cesarean.
Mm-hmm.
Lennon's birthday.
Right.
So many little pieces of evidence, and it's a question of, if you do research like this, it's a question of connecting the dots.
Mm-hmm.
There are other accounts of her iron resolve and her manipulation,
Mm-hmm.
and other rock artists just couldn't stand her, because Lennon insisted that she be present at almost all times.
Mm-hmm.
He was with other people, including the recording sessions,
Mm-hmm.
the end.
So do you think that at the very beginning that Yoko did have fondness for her husband?
Well, this was her third husband.
Right.
Her third husband.
Right.
And she wanted fame and fortune.
Mm-hmm.
Don't we all? And she attended this gallery opening where Paul had invested £5,000, the Indica Gallery, which is in a little square, which was just across the square was where Hendrix gave his first performance in London after securing his passport from the person who got Jimi Hendrix's passport, because he had a different name on it, and he got it in one phone call. And this, to me, that's too much of a coincidence.
Mm-hmm.
With the same attorney who got Hendrix's passport to go to London was also the attorney for Samuel Havatoy.
Okay.
10 years
So
later.
go ahead. What'd you say?
10 years later, he's the same attorney,
Okay.
Leon Dicker.
Okay. Okay. So
10 years later, 14 years later. Dicker gets the passport in 66. And we learn about Dicker in 1980, the very year that Lennon is assassinated. He was acting, and I have the correspondence from Dicker. Of course, I put the original documents in a vault, in a bank vault. So if anything happens, it's there.
Mhm.
You can see that he did, and you can also learn that Dicker was Hendrix's and his trio's attorney, and widely mentioned in the book, Your Experience, the autobiography of Noel Redding, who was the bass player for the Jimi Hendrix Experience.
Mhm.
So this guy Dicker was, I would say, assigned to follow rock stars.
Okay. Okay. So tell us a little bit more about John and Yoko, because people are under the impression that maybe, yes, she was controlling, but that they had a good relationship. And in one part of the book, you said that she lived in one section of the apartment and John lived in another. And, he was angry at her business dealings, and he was angry with her on the fact that, she it was just incredible. People
Well, it's not me, it's the people who actually witnessed this. The John Green, who was the tarot card reader for the last 5 years and knew them intimately, and would call, or have Yoko would call him at 3 a.m. when she was in Japan. And he wrote a book on the subject. And then Brad Seaman, who was hired the last couple of years of John's life to be a personal assistant for John Lennon, whose book also was very revealing and saying that they were dysfunctional. And finally, at the end, literally at the end, the Andy Peebles interview on the BBC, which he said he doesn't know how they got together. And in his account, after he was hired by her for many years to do work for her, and then when he ceased to have work with her, he wrote in the various newspapers. It's all in there. The BBC interviewer that she, in his opinion, she wrecked the greatest English band that ever lived. And then, of course, there was the final Playboy interview, which came out in January of '81, in which it was clear to the interviewer there that they were totally dysfunctional, as well as Havatoy's constant companion, who I knew, Luciano Spadaccino, who died of AIDS in 1987, that he told people that they were going to get a divorce. I mean, there's so many, and that's just the start of this, just scratching the surface.
Had John Lennon lived, he would have come out with he would have composed wonderful music, right?
Of course, I dedicate the book to the songs that he would have composed had he been allowed to live.
So tell us about the very last day when Chapman came. I had an encounter with John Lennon, and he just asked for the autograph, and then later on, when they came back to the Dakota after a recording session, what happened, and what does the public not know?
Well, we know that they left around 4 o'clock to go to the record plant
Mm-hmm.
toward wherever they, I forgot the studio. I guess it was the record plant. And to have a recording session for the album, the next album that came out the following year, 81. And Chapman just stood out there for 5 hours talking to the doorman, who turned out to be an anti-Castro Cuban sniper who was never called into account, never interviewed. But he did give an account, but it's clear that he was involved. That's why I put the photograph of the book here on the cover of John, blind John, determined Yoko, and Perdermo, he has very distinctive glasses, which you can't really see in this, peeking out of the door of the sentry box outside the Dakota. To me, that's an iconic picture taken by the iconic photograph of a photographer who photographed celebrity, but especially John and Yoko.
Was that on John's last day of life that picture was taken?
17 days before.
Okay.
And, Yoko had ordered the security for John lifted, and he was scheduled to come back the day after the assassination. Which is, there's so many pieces involved here.
What do you mean, come back the day after the assassination?
Go, take a vacation. You really need a vacation.
Right.
And his vacation ended the day after John was killed. He was told to come back December 9th, which of course was too late because Lennon was killed the night of December 8th.
Right.
And the next day, Ronald Reagan comes to the city, first time since his election. And when asked about the assassination, says, well, we don't need gun control.
Mm-hmm.
It all fits.
Now, right now, I'm reading a book on Nixon's efforts to have John and Yoko deported. And the fact that Nixon wanted him deported was over a direct charge when he was in England. And the real reason was he was stirring up the peace movement in America, right?
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
He was anti-war.
Right.
Anti-Nixon. And 18-year-olds had gotten the right to vote that year.
Mm-hmm.
Nixon's advisors said, could cost us the election. So they targeted John Lennon because he had tremendous appeal then and now.
Mm-hmm. But also, they wanted Yoko deported because she was looking for her daughter, right?
I don't know about that. I didn't pay attention to that. The issue was Lennon. I mean, she had she tried to record songs. They didn't get anywhere near the popularity of John Lennon, despite the fact she was married to John Lennon.
Mm-hmm.
So, she had their first two marriages were to two very famous Japanese artists.
Mm-hmm.
One, I believe, a composer, and the other, a painter.
Okay, but she was wealthy in her own right.
Yeah, but she didn't have the cachet. She was the most famous woman on the rock scene as a consequence of her marriage to John Lennon.
Mm-hmm.
Because at the time she was blamed for the breakup of the Beatles.
Mm-hmm. So, I lost my train of thought. So on that last day, tell us what happened. So they come back. It was after 11, right?
No, before 11, it was 10:50.
Okay.
And
And
she walks through the arch in front of the Dakota,
right.
40 feet ahead of John. And Chapman, in his interview by the cops, said, if they had been together, I don't think I would have fired shots.
Mhm.
But Chapman was programmed Manchurian style, Manchurian candidate style.
Okay, so she walks ahead of her husband.
Yes.
Do you think that was planned?
I
That-
think that's, let's just state the facts. They walk off together. And at the account that she gives to the detective when she's quizzed about that evening,
Mhm.
and later, subsequently, of the account given by Chapman, Chapman clearly states that if they were together, he doesn't think they would have fired. Now, the most recent account connected to the assassination was in the Daily Mail on June 10th
Of
So-
this year.
of this year,
Yes.
by a fellow, I think it's Whalen. Let me take this call because I'm waiting for a call from. Hello? 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 I don't know, they just. It's a lot of crank calls on the land phone, but the land phone has an answering machine.
Mhm.
So when they went, he didn't think he would have fired the shots that night because he had been there before. And he said is according to the accounts of Chapman and who was the presumed assassin, he's sitting in prison still. He didn't have the hollow points that he needed to really kill Lennon. So he went back to Hawaii, where he was from, came back with the hollow points later. And
Mhm.
that night, December 8th, that's pretty clear to me that the account that was under the arch about what was happening under the arch, that there was a second gunman under the arch. Now that might have been Perdomo because this fellow who the Daily Mail interviewed has been researching the actual assassination, said that there are two different types of bullets. He got a hold of the autopsy reports. And there are two different types of bullets in the gun.
Okay,
Guns-
you talk about the day after, which would be
December.
9th, right? December 9th, which was on a Tuesday. You say that Yoko was in a real hurry to get John cremated. So if right, so if that's the case, when was the autopsy performed?
I guess in the hospital.
Okay.
I just found this out this past weekend, so I haven't gone into the details of the Daily Mail where the autopsy was performed. But she was in a hurry, and he was cremated within, I don't know, 36 hours. So it was, but we do know the entry wounds, it sounds very much like the Kennedy assassination. There were shots fired from the back and from the front. In the case of John Lennon, that we know now as a result of this
Okay.
examination of the,
Okay, so you wrote this book, and if what you're saying is accurate, who suppressed this evidence for 40 years?
well, who suppressed it at the time was obviously, according to Fenton Bev Bressler, who wrote the first account in the 1980s, the CIA, who had they had their own men in the New York City Police Department, and obviously what they want goes. So the evidence was just suppressed, and they even had an account that Chapman was arguing with the doorman, but some guy on the street who was interviewed by the television statements at the time, keeping in mind that first impressions count most, claimed that Chapman was arguing with the doorman. There was no argument. Chapman was completely catatonic, reading
Catcher on the Rye.
Catcher on the Rye, yeah.
Uh-huh.
And the cops who came on the scene almost immediately after, because they were investigating car break-ins, said he was just standing there, and he easily could have gotten away. But since Chapman was programmed to say, "I just killed John Lennon," by Perdermo, that we have an account of as well by the detectives at the time. It was an open and shut case. They didn't need a trial.
There was no trial
There was no trial.
because he pleaded guilty.
Yes,
Okay. So the public had no inkling of what was going on behind the scenes.
absolutely, as usual. My favorite quote from Shakespeare: "All the world's a stage."
Okay.
What goes on backstage is often more
Okay.
important.
So Chapman has served more than 40 years in the prison system in New York State.
Yes,
You said he was catatonic, in a catatonic state when he was
well,
arrested.
they didn't know why he was just standing there holding Catcher in the Rye. He was completely, and the cops said he looked like he had been programmed. We have the cops who arrested him said, it's very strange. He's like he was programmed. He's just standing there. He didn't try to get away.
So do you think he's been programmed to become acclimated to prison for 40 years?
Well, he still thinks he did it, and he's atoning for it because he's a devout Christian. Because he was citing Catcher in the Rye. He thought he was Holden Caulfield. He dedicated his Bible to Holden Caulfield.
Mm-hmm.
I'm Holden Caulfield. It's just, and then he comes around to Jesus Christ. And the reason he comes around to Jesus Christ is the ministers who had easy access to him in prison and on the phone were reinforcing his sense of guilt at killing John Lennon.
Mm-hmm.
Minister that McGowan, when he retired in the early 2000s, the going away party was given by the representative of the time, Marsha Blackburn from Tennessee, who then became the senator from Tennessee, also
Okay.
fundamentalist Christian. And Chapman, they loved Chapman because he killed Lennon, because Lennon had said that we're more famous than Jesus Christ.
Remember that, yes.
Said that, a big hullabaloo in this country, not in England, but here. And after that, Beatles records were burned, they were banned, and they never performed again in the United States. So it fits. You just got to connect the dots.
Mm-hmm. So Chapman was arrested. He pleaded guilty. He was thrown in jail. And then nobody ever heard from him again, right?
Well, there were interviews, but he still, basically, he was allowed to be interviewed by the ministers from the Presbyterian, very conservative church, the Presbyterian Church of America, an offshoot of the Presbyterian Church, Southern based. And that was how it was, they reinforced the condition. First, he was Holden Caulfield. Then he was serving Jesus Christ. Now he no longer identifies with Holden Caulfield.
Okay.
This on, and they can turn this off.
Okay.
He was susceptible. Only 20% of the population is susceptible to hypnosis, and he was one of them.
Hypnosis for the rest of his life, though, right?
Well, no, I mean, they, well, in a way, you believe, you're made to believe, and then you can be snapped out of it. Yeah, hypnosis, right? Conditioning. And I go into all the scientific stuff about hypnosis, which is extremely interesting to me, and I thought it'd be interesting to the reader. The work that's been done. It's the same thing with Sirhan Sirhan, who assassinated Robert Kennedy. Or maybe he didn't, because the forensic evidence, and a lot of it was destroyed, pointed to another assassin as well. So this is as of this past weekend, we have at least 2 assassins in those 2 high-profile murders. The night that Kennedy wins the California primary, and that upsets the presidential election of 1968 very much. He would have become president in 68. He wanted, at least I would think in the back of his mind, revenge for the assassination of his brother, just like Robert F. Kennedy Jr. today wants, some sort of proper closure for the assassination of his father and his was the president of the States. Everything, it's very, very interesting. I mean, again, it would make a great film, a lot of these things, but these are usually not touched because they're too hot to handle. What's going to happen?
So do you think that the John Lennon story is too hot to handle?
Well, it's been 43 years.
Right. So Robert Kennedy's death was in 68, 12 years before John Lennon was killed.
And that was still too hot to handle.
Right.
That's why Robert F. Kennedy Jr., that's part of the reason why he's running and why he has high name recognition, obviously, because he's a Kennedy. Okay. And of course, John F. Kennedy's son was killed in a plane crash. 9. So, I mean, I'm not going to get into that, but to me, a lot of this is very suspicious. This is the seat that Hillary Clinton took in 2000. So you put it together.
Well, I kind of think that JFK Jr. was a little bit irresponsible to be flying a plane. He was not a seasoned pilot.
No, I understand that. But he had charisma.
Right.
Real charisma.
Right.
He would have certainly won the U.S. Senate seat.
Well, I think that he unfortunately died because he was too reckless. That's my opinion.
That's your opinion.
That there was no conspiracy around his death. That's how I feel about it. So people who are interested in hearing or reading what you have to say about John Lennon and his death, tell us where they could get the book and how.
Well, they can get the book online at Amazon for $20.
Okay. Okay.
No, I lived through the guy who moved out and in with her the night that Lennon was killed. I thought that was bizarre because he was the interior decorator.
Uh-huh.
She introduced Samuel Havatoy to John when she said, "Oh, those chairs in that antique store window on 70th and Lexington, I'd like to have them." She walked to the store, and who was there to sell them the chairs but Samuel Havatoy?
Mm-hmm.
Next thing you know, 2 years later, after John Lennon had signed his will, leaving everything to Yoko,
Mm-hmm.
and 2 years later, 9 days later, Leon Dicker incorporates Samuel Havatoy's gallery on the ground floor of the brownstone where my parents had an apartment, a fourth floor apartment, for 35 years. Uncontrolled.
Okay. Soon after he wrote the will and left everything to Yoko, how soon after that was he assassinated?
Well, I would say less than 2 years.
Okay. So hold up your book so people could see it and order it from Amazon. Careless Genius. Okay, great. So good.
Thank you, Cynthia.
Yes, thank you. This will be very interesting. See how many people like this video. And thank you, everybody, for listening. You've been listening to Tony
Brunovich.
and I'm Cynthia Pooler. So if you like this show, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you, Tony.